Hi everyone, Brian Crawl here, your personal trainer and fitness instructor from Be Your Best Body Personal Training and True Life Development, Holistic Personal Development. Back with another supplemental video for you here, and this one's on resistance curves, a very interesting topic. And I realized that during the technique phase I mentioned resistance curves a lot and optimizing resistance curves. I showed you how I was optimizing resistance curves of certain exercises or told you to do it. But I haven't taught you exactly what resistance curves are and illustrated the different types of them. So that's what I'm going to be doing today in this video, using this graph here. Down on the x-axis, this represents the movement, all right, the parts of the repetition from the beginning to the middle to the end. And then up here on the y-axis, we have the amount of resistance. Now, before I start teaching you about resistance curves, I want to tell you about how your body naturally handles resistance with its own strength, or its strength curve, if you will. So, at the very bottom of a movement, right, like this, if you're doing bench press, this is actually where you are weakest. When you are all stretched out at the bottom, you're at your weakest, right? So you're going to actually start your exercises down here, okay? And as the exercise continues, it's going to generally get easier and easier. Now with the bench press at the top there, you should generally have no problem locking out and getting a squeeze. But you'll find that with some exercises, like curls for instance, you actually have a muscle belly, at which point your strength will peak and then begin to fall off. Okay, so you might notice there are some exercises where the top actually gets harder. Right? Others, may just continue on up and up like that. All right, but always you are going to be weakest at the bottom, okay, unless you're getting less resistance at the bottom, all right, and we'll get to that. But now in addition to you being weaker at the bottom of the movement, it's also worth noting that this is the most hypertrophic part of the movement, all right? It's not up here where you are going to be strongest and your strength might be peaking. You are actually going to be getting the most hypertrophy where you are the weakest. So that's something to keep in mind as well, just so you know that the bottom part of the movement is not bad or anything like that. Now, another thing you need to know about your muscles and how they handle resistance curves is that when your muscles are performing any movement pattern, they're going to be getting used to it, okay? Your muscles get used to performing patterns, all right? Anything that it repeats, it's going to be getting used to, right? That's why you can walk upstairs in the dark or with your eyes closed. You don't need to see the stairs because your muscles are used to doing that movement, okay? So resistance curves are no exception to that. Your muscles are going to be getting used to certain resistance curves, as you do them over and over and over again. And what happens as your muscles get used to things, they become less and less hypertrophic over time, right? There is a rate of diminishing returns, as I've talked about so many times before. And different equipment and exercises provide different resistance curves, and there's going to be differences and thus trade-offs between them. Okay, and some of them are going to be more optimal than others, and some of them are going to be better for certain things than others, all right? And it's going to be also very important to switch it up from one resistance curve to another from time to time to prevent your muscle from getting used to that pattern and it losing, its hypertrophic stimulus, okay? So now that you understand why resistance curves are significant, let's talk about what the different ones are. I'm going to start with an obvious one. So the first resistance curve isn't a curve at all. It's a straight line across the top. Just full 100% resistance throughout all parts of the movement. All right, so this happens with vertical movements. All right, like that bench press, you're just going straight up with squat, deadlift, anything where you are moving vertically, overhead press, you're not getting a resistance curve with that. You are getting full resistance throughout the entire exercise. And you may also find this on some machines, though oftentimes machines tend to give you more of a curve in their resistance. Now, this obviously has a clear advantage. You're getting full resistance throughout all parts of the movement. Seems like a good thing, right? However, there is also a trade-off, a con that goes along with that, and that is that when you are lifting your heaviest, you may find it difficult to get out of the bottom part of that movement, right? Since you are weakest at the bottom like I illustrated for you before. So this is pretty much optimal until you get to the point where you are strength training and you're trying to lift heavy, and you find that when you go all the way down, suddenly you lose all of your strength. That's what I found when I was doing bench press and doing a lot of progressive overload of weight, getting to below 6 reps, going into strength training, and I would find that I would unrack the weight, And if I went down 3/4 of the way, suddenly I lost my strength and the bar would just like hit my chest, and I wouldn't be able to get out of that stretched out position without my spotter helping me, right? And I would have to only go down 3/4 of the way because, again, my strength curve was down here, whereas the resistance curve wasn't a curve, it was a straight line across the top. So that's why this might not always be optimal, though it will be most of the time. Now the next type of resistance curve is one of decreasing resistance, all right? It starts out giving you 100% resistance up here at the beginning, but then it starts to decline, all right? Maybe not a lot at first, but progressively it is decreasing more and more. And this occurs on machines where the weight is on a lever like this, so that the weight starts going straight upwards, but it starts curving diagonally and eventually will be getting more horizontal. So since it is curving away from gravity, you are actually getting decreasing resistance. Now this, of course, is kind of the opposite of the natural strength curve I showed you about that went like this. So it might not make sense to many of you out there, it might not seem like an optimal resistance curve, and you are right. And you might even be wondering, what kind of exercises would even employ such a thing? It doesn't make sense to curve away from gravity if you're already lifting, in line with gravity, which is optimal resistance. Why curve away from it to give less? Yes, it doesn't make sense because of the fact that it goes against the body's natural strength curve. And yet there are exercises where this happens, such as with certain machines, such as hack squat machines, preacher curl machines, right, where you're starting like this, but you're curving more up like this, so at the top there's no resistance, all right? And, there are certain machines I've seen, old school machines, where the plates are loaded on the side. It might be like a bench press machine, so that you're pressing like this, but there's a lever that's actually going like that, right? So it's curving, again, away from the natural path. And then also certain free weight exercises like the landmine press, okay? You're pressing like that. And just any time that you are curving away from the natural force of gravity, keep in mind, you are doing something that is the inverse of your natural strength curve and is suboptimal in many ways. However, there is one pro to this, and that is that you're getting full resistance when you are at your most hypertrophic, okay? So this is the weakest, but also the most hypertrophic. So there's a pro there that you're at least getting hypertrophy from this resistance curve, at the point of the exercise where it matters the most. However, the con is that it is still the inverse of the body's natural strength curve, so that means that it's only going to be useful in specific circumstances, okay? Such as with exercises that you are very strong at, even at the bottom, and it just doesn't matter, right? So for me, hack squat is actually a great strength of mine. If you saw my leg training video, you watched me do like over 600 pounds on that. So, I am strong at hack squat even though it goes against the natural strength curve. That doesn't mean that if the hack squat machine was built differently to have a different strength curve that I might not be even better at it. It just means that, it's negligible with that piece of equipment for me. But it is something you do need to watch out for. You need to be able to evaluate if that exercise is really working for you or not, okay? Don't just do it if it's not working for you. Unless, of course, there's no other options, which is, the other case in which you want to just be doing this type of exercise. But there's rarely not going to be other exercises that you could switch it out for, okay? If you're doing preacher curl with a barbell like this, and you're noticing how suboptimal it is, right? There's so many other options for you to do that will cause the same type of stimulus, but with a better resistance curve. So in most of the cases with these exercises, they should just be switched out for similar other exercises with better resistance curves, such as the other ones I'm going to explain to you here, all right? So the next resistance curve is one with steadily increasing resistance, not actually curved, just a straight line of resistance that steadily increases at the same rate throughout the movement. So this type of resistance curve already is occurring very closely in accordance with the body's natural strength curve, that I told you went sort of like that, right? They're kind of close, all right? So you can already see that this is probably a much more optimal resistance curve, at least in that sense, all right? So what does this resistance curve occur with? Well, resistance bands, for one. The more you stretch them out, the more resistance they are giving you. That's one of the things I love about them. cable curls done at an angle. That's one of the best ways to optimize a resistance curve with curls instead of grabbing free weights and curling against gravity like this. Imagine if you grabbed a cable from a cable machine, and the cable machine is over there. All right, so look at this resistance curve, right? That's the direction of the cable, the angle of pull, so that when I'm curling, I'm getting increasing resistance. And at the top here, the cable is still pulling, right? I haven't lost resistance because I'm locked out against gravity, but instead I'm getting maximum or optimal resistance at the top here. All right, so that's a great way to optimize cable curls. And then there's certain machines that provide increasing resistance, though it's not usually steadily increasing resistance like this. We're gonna get more to that in a moment though. So the pros of this resistance curve are that it follows the body's natural strength curve in that it is providing less resistance when you're weaker and more when you are stronger. All right, so that's great, but it's not without any cons. The con is that it may not be challenging enough for lighter loads to be very useful at all. Right? Because remember that this is also the most hypertrophic part of the exercise. So when you're using things like resistance bands or any other exercise that provide this type of strength curve, you need to make sure you are using a challenging enough weight. I cannot stress this enough. All right, if you are sticking with light resistance bands, you are not going to see much hypertrophy at all. Resistance bands really do require more weight to be used and a better technique as well to make sure you're not losing out on the hypertrophy that you would otherwise be getting with exercises where the resistance curve didn't start down here. Okay, so now let's move on to another similar one. The resistance curve where your resistance increases but not steadily. It increases little at first, and then more and more as the rep goes on. See? So it curves upward. You're getting less resistance at first, right? And it increases little by little, but then is increasing exponentially as the exercise moves on. All right? So this might be confusing to you because, you might be thinking, well, when would you even be doing this, right? You're not getting a whole lot of resistance through a huge portion of the exercise, and it's the part where it's most hypertrophic, right? So that doesn't even seem optimal, and you'd be right. That is not optimal. And yet, again, there are exercises that employ this resistance curve. So you might be wondering where this resistance curve would even be found. And it would be mostly with machines, certain types of machines that, again, have a lever that is loaded on the side with round plates, right? And then it moves. And so the resistance curve that I showed you before went like this. This resistance curve, you start here with the lever, and the lever moves up like that. Okay, so you're getting little to no resistance down here, you're starting to get resistance here, and then you're only getting full resistance right about there. So that's where you end up with this curved resistance curve. And this will happen with seated bench press machines, seated row machines, seated leg extension machines, and leg curl machines. Basically any machines where it is seated, and again, you're loading the plates onto a lever, right? You got this bench press where you're pressing like this, and then a lever is going like this. So anytime you sit down on a machine, you load the plates on the side, and then you press like this, and you notice the plates are doing that. That's this resistance curve. And the pros of this are the same as the previous resistance curve. However, this one also makes lifting heavy even easier than any other resistance curve. All right, however, the con of this is that it is just too easy. Okay, it is just so suboptimal in its use of the force of gravity, which goes downward as we know, right? And so it is only at the very top here where you might start to go straight up that you're getting 100% resistance. And so if you're ever using a machine like this, you need to know that it is not very hypertrophic, which would be happening right here. And the only way to make it at all effective is to maximize the loading that you are using with it. All right, you have to really try to max out with these types of resistance curves. It's the only way you're going to be getting an adequate stimulus and causing any type of hypertrophy or strength adaptations. All right, however, that being said, I would also recommend avoiding exercises like this, unless you really feel the need to use them because there's maybe a certain movement you are very weak on or you got injured or something. But unless you're trying to condition yourself in some sort of special way, this type of resistance curve is just too suboptimal. It is just as suboptimal as the resistance curve that starts at the top and then goes down like that. All right, they are the exact inverse of one another. and they are both equally suboptimal. And anytime you find exercises with either one of these, you should really try to optimize the resistance curve by switching the exercise for a different one with a more optimal curve. Now, this type of resistance curve occurs with any type of curling movements that are done with free weights. So like with bicep curls, you know, if you're doing them with free weights, you are not going to get any resistance here or here. All right, you're locked out at the top with no resistance and at the bottom with no resistance. The resistance increases until you get full resistance here and then decreases. So you're only getting full resistance at the center of the exercise, if that, because often you won't even. And this also occurs with any machines that are, again, side loaded onto a lever. You're loading plates onto a lever, but the lever is going like this, okay? So the other curves were like this or like this. This time you'd be doing, you know, more of the center of the movement or maybe the full range of movement, all right? But the point is that it's any curling motion done against the force of gravity. Now, it should be fairly obvious to pretty much all you viewers out there that this is a suboptimal resistance curve, very suboptimal, because like with the other side-loaded, you know, lever machine exercises, you're only getting full resistance at one point of the movement, if that. Because if you're using bad form and doing cheat reps like many people do on curls, you're actually cheating yourself out of getting full resistance at the center, all right? So it's really important to use proper form and go slow and not have momentum carry you through, because if you do that, then you will get full resistance at least in the center, which makes it better than the side lever loaded exercises that might not even get up to being fully you know, vertical and facing the force of gravity. You know, some of those machines are just, you know, making it way too easy, and you don't want to make it easy on yourself. You want to make it hard on yourself. So you want to do your curls slowly, all right, not let momentum carry you through, because what's going to happen is if you are doing curls with momentum, momentum detracts against resistance. Understand, it subtracts some of that resistance from the resistance curve, so that's why it's not even going all the way up to the top here. So if you're doing your curls by really driving the bar up hard at the point at the bottom where you're getting like no resistance, so that momentum is starting to carry it up through here, and then you're like leaning back like this to sort of heave it backwards, you know, using that, you know, force of your body, you're not even getting you're not even getting as optimal of a resistance as you could. You know, and the worse your form gets, the more it's going to be just like that. You know, you would only be getting half of the resistance at the point where you should be getting full resistance. Okay, so with good form, your curls could actually, you know, improve their resistance curve and be more like that if you're doing them really slowly, for instance. But the point is that any curling movements should be causing you a uniform hill-like resistance curve. All right, now the pros of this is that you're not getting full resistance at the bottom here when you're the weakest, and the cons are that you're only getting full resistance in the very middle of the exercise, the middle peak, right? It's not even like it's the middle third, right? It's really usually just going to be a peak right, you know, there. I mean, that's just like a few inches, really, okay? The rest of the exercise, the huge part of the exercise, like, you know, maybe 80% of it is in this zone here where you're getting less resistance, and less the further away from the peak that you get, all right? So this is, of course, a highly suboptimal resistance curve. However, it can be optimized by switching from free weights to cables and using them at an angle like I taught you before. All right, so those are all of the different types of resistance curves and all of their pros and cons and everything you need to know about them. And the takeaway here, the conclusion that you need to, you know, bring with you into your training is that unless the resistance curve for an exercise you are doing is already optimal, try to optimize it, right, by switching to another piece of equipment that has a better resistance curve with more pros and less cons. Or even if you are mainly using optimal resistance curves, just try switching it up from time to time so that your muscles do not get too used to the same resistance curves, all right? Because as I said, then they're going to be less and less hypertrophic the more you get used to them, all right? So switching it up from time to time to cause muscle confusion is key, even when you are using optimized resistance curves such as me. You know, almost all of my exercises are done with optimized resistance curves, but I will still switch it up between them from time to time, all right? So I hope that was interesting and helpful for all of you. you. And in order to learn how to optimize exercises and their resistance curves, make sure you have watched part 3 and 4 of the Fitness Programming 101 course that I released, at the beginning of this channel before I started doing shorter videos like this. And if you have any questions about resistance curves and the curves of certain exercises, please leave them below. And if you would like someone to do your programming for you so that they can optimize your resistance curves and everything else about your exercises and your training, be sure to reach out to me using the link below. And otherwise, you guys can look forward to the next video that I have coming out for you, which will be on the different types of hypertrophy training.